Let's talk about dosage. What is the right amount of mushrooms to take for your psychedelic journey? What is the right amount for a beginner tripper versus someone who's more experienced? And does dosage actually matter? My name is James. On this channel, I share my best advice around psychedelics, as well as all the spiritual lessons that I've been learning from mushrooms, DMT, ayahuasca, and life. Stay tuned till the end of this video to receive my free mushroom trip checklist, a guide on what to do before, during, and after your psychedelic trip. So let's dive into dosage. Dosage is an interesting topic in the psychedelic community. I've heard from a few psychedelic facilitators who say that dosage doesn't really matter, that no matter how little or how much mushrooms they take, the mushrooms will give them the trip that they need. And I have to say, I disagree. In my personal experience, dosage matters a lot. I have done close to 100 mushroom trips at this point, if not more. I've kind of lost count. And I can say with confidence that the amount you take absolutely makes a difference. It's a night and day difference between a 1 gram trip, a 3 gram trip, a 5 gram trip, or something beyond that. Now, the difficulty with dosage is that everyone's sensitivity is different. So 1 gram of psilocybin for me might be different than 1 gram for you. Further adding to that complexity, the different strains of mushrooms also have different potencies. 1 gram of blue meanies is going to give you a different strength, a different potency of a trip than 1 gram of golden teachers. But one thing is clear to me, dosage matters. The potency of your trip matters. This idea that the mushrooms will increase the intensity of the trip for you regardless of how much you take, I personally haven't seen that in my trips. I believe that other people may be experiencing that. Maybe they're quite sensitive, and for them, just a little bit of psilocybin unlocks the gates. But for me, there's a clear demarcation between 1 gram, 3 gram, 5 gram, and so on. I want to explain why I think potency matters. Beyond the physical component of taking more, what is the spiritual perspective? What's happening on the spiritual level when you take a higher dose versus a lower dose? And for me, what it comes down to is the ego. How much in your ego are you currently living? How much in your habitual day-to-day patterns and mode of thinking are you stuck in? And how much of a kick do you need? How strong of a kick do you need to loosen your hold on the ego, or to exit the ego entirely for a few hours and to tap into your higher self, that cosmic divine perspective from which you can get new solutions, new insights, and new ways of seeing your life. So if the kick is not strong enough, my ego is still going to be present in the trip. And that's going to prevent me from receiving certain downloads or hearing certain messages from my soul, the divine, the higher self. When I take a higher dose, my hold on the ego, my hold on my limited ways of thinking is loosened, and I allow myself to receive new perspectives. So that's where the potency can really matter. It's not about the visuals. It's not about some egoic, I'm having a hero dose moment. It's about how much expansion do I want to feel in the trip? How much of my ego do I want to let go of? The metaphor I love to use is that of a rocket ship. If you want to go to Mars, you need a certain amount of thrust and fuel to lift off and exit the orbit of Earth. That's the potency of the shrooms. If you're having a high dose, high potency trip, what you're doing is you're giving yourself enough liftoff to exit orbit and go further into the realms of the soul. If you don't have enough liftoff, you're still going to fly, but you're going to fly a bit closer to Earth. You're still going to have a lot of your conditioning and patterning present with you. And if we're going to take this metaphor to the very end, microdosing shrooms would be the equivalent of getting on a hot air balloon. So you're flying a little bit, but you're very close to Earth. Nothing major is going on. You're just getting that little bit extra perspective, a little bit higher vantage point, but still very much close to the ground. So what it comes down to is, how far do you want to go? Do you want to go to Mars, or do you want to stay closer to Earth? The way I like to trip is I want to go to Mars. I want enough liftoff to fully let go of my ego, or as much as possible, and fly high enough on the shrooms that I can see that higher vantage point, that higher perspective, where the challenges and the problems and the issues that I'm dealing in my day-to-day life, I get to see them from a different perspective, a more cosmic perspective. That gives me access to solutions. I have new information. I have new perspective that I can apply to those problems and challenges. They no longer seem so daunting or so limiting because I've been able to see the whole maze on the shrooms. So when you're deciding on dosage, think of it like a dance between you and the mushrooms. How much of you, the controlling you, the egoic you, do you want to be present in the trip versus how much are you willing to let the mushrooms drive the car? If you're someone who's just starting out in psychedelics, you may want to have a little bit more control. And that's where the lower dose can be really helpful. You might not be going to Mars, but that might not be your intention. Versus if you're experienced and you're ready to go deeper, you're ready to go a few layers down, you're ready to look at your soul, the light and the shadows deeply. That's where ceding control to the mushrooms and taking a more potent dose can be really helpful in unblocking the things that have been keeping you stuck and seeing beyond your earthly limitations. For me, I have total trust in the mushrooms. I have a relationship, a friendship with the mushrooms. So I want them to drive the car. I want to let go of the steering wheel and let them take me to the unfamiliar, the new, the unexplored. If you think of it like a spectrum between your ego self, your earthly self, let's just call it that way, and your higher self, your expanded self, your connected to everything in the cosmos self, how far do you want to go? How far do you want to let go of the egoic self and drift closer to that unity, that source self? That's going to determine how much you want to take. By the way, this is why ayahuasca is so powerful for people. Ayahuasca is kind of like shrooms times 50. It's very potent. So what's happening there, and this is just my theory, but the kick from ayahuasca, the liftoff is so strong that all the ideas you have about yourself, all the ideas of lack, limitation, depression, problems that your ego is desperately holding on to, all of that has no choice but to dissolve during an ayahuasca trip. There's no way you can hold on to the ego with that much potency. That's why it's so intense, and that's why people have such a powerful, transformative experience, because at that point, you're going to Jupiter. Whether you want it or not, your ego is pretty much completely dissolved, and you're able to see the truth and the love in every aspect of your being and in every aspect of your challenges, your life, your problems. You're able to remove the ego perspective from it and really look at it from a more cosmic perspective. The beautiful thing with shrooms is once you know your sensitivity and you know the type of strain you're dealing with, then you can really fine-tune the experience you want to have. You're going to know that 1 gram gives me this type of experience. 3 grams if I want to trip. 5 grams if I want to trip. You can really start to calibrate how many grams exactly your body needs to achieve the liftoff that you want to get on your trip. I haven't discovered any limits with shrooms in terms of dosage. So I think if someone really wants to go deep and they're prepared and they have a trip sitter, there's no limit to how deep you can go. I think you can really get to DMT-like states and ayahuasca-like states just from shrooms, but it's going to have to be a very high dose. And of course, I caution anyone attempting that to be very prepared and to have experience under your belt and have a trip sitter, have a facilitator. Don't embark on the super high dose journeys alone unless you really know yourself and you know that you can handle that. Because, flying to Jupiter, it sounds fun, but it's also incredibly intense. And if you're not prepared for that, it can be a really rough ride. So make sure you have some experience. If you're ever feeling unsure about the dosage, start with a lower dose. You can always up your dose within the first hour. So if you take 1 gram and you set a stopwatch and 60 minutes goes by and you go, not really feeling it, that's the perfect time to take 1 more gram or 2 more grams, whatever you think is appropriate for you. Within the first hour, you can redose and increase the potency of the trip. After the first hour, from my experience, your tolerance already builds up. So it's going to extend your trip, but it's not going to make it any more potent. So you want to be cautious. You want to really build up your experience step by step, gram by gram. For beginners, I always recommend start with 1 gram. It's very unlikely that anything bad will happen at 1 gram. And you'll quickly realize if you're sensitive enough to 1 gram or if you need a higher dose. There's no rush. Remember that you have a lifetime's worth of trips in your future. So there's no need to do a heroic dose tomorrow night because you will never get a chance to do it again. Of course you will. You have years upon years upon years of tripping ahead of you. So take it slow, be prepared, and just learn about yourself. How many grams is enough for you to lift off, to exit the orbit of your ego? And how many grams feels comfortable to you? How intense do you like your experiences versus how controlled do you want your experience to be? I recently had a trip where the potency was not quite enough. The liftoff was not strong enough for me personally to get to the altitude that I like to be at. And I want to explain the difference I felt between that trip versus a higher potency trip. I still had a good trip. I still had insights and downloads that I received that were very valuable, but I could feel my ego still being in the background, still kind of getting in the way of the shrooms guidance. Whereas usually what happens for me on shrooms is the volume of my ego is turned down. So it might still be there, but it's very, very quiet. And on this trip, the volume wasn't quite turned down all the way. So I still had access to my habitual ways of thinking and less access to the unlimited, expanded thinking of the mushrooms. And what I realized on that trip was how important dosage is for me. And that's what inspired this video. I realized, other people say that dosage is not so important, but for me, the potency matters. For me, I need that strong kick to catapult me into the cosmos so that I can see what I'm not seeing, so that my ego is not in the way, so that I can see my own blind spots, my weaknesses, my limitations, and get access to solutions that from my ego self, I can't really see it. I'm still stuck on ground level. And so what this trip felt for me was more of an extended meditation. I was expanded by the shrooms, but I wasn't tripping. It felt like I was connected to my expanded self, but that I could have used a little more expansion. And so that's a good metaphor that you can use as well when you're deciding on the dose. How expanded do you want to be? How much do you want to be stretched during this trip? If you've never done any stretching in your life, you may want to take it nice and slow and gentle. For any beginners listening to this, 1 gram of dry shrooms is the perfect place to start. It's gentle enough, but strong enough to give you an experience. Once you're more experienced, you can go to 2 grams, 3 grams, and so on. You just work your way up until you feel like, oof, that was a good workout. That stretched my mind, my body, my soul, my spirit. I feel like I've been sufficiently stretched. So until you get to that point, keep experimenting with the dosage. If you've ever done shrooms and you felt like, I didn't get too much out of it, consider that the dosage may have been the issue, that you may need a little bit more of a kick, a little bit more liftoff to feel that stretch. So here's my rule of thumb. For beginner trippers, if you're just beginning your mushroom explorations, take less than what you think you need. So if you think you need 2 grams, take 1 gram and see how it goes. Stay on the cautious side. For experienced trippers, those who have done many trips and they know what they're getting into, take a little bit more than what you think you need. Stretch yourself a little bit more, because as an experienced tripper, you've probably gotten comfortable at a certain level. And so it may be interesting to just stretch that box a little bit. Now, a couple disclaimers. Number 1, if you're going to do this type of trip, you need to be prepared. So make sure you have everything in order. If you need advice on that, check out my video, The 8 Things You Must Know Before Doing a Mushroom Trip. and also check out my free mushroom trip checklist by going to mushroomchecklist.com. Disclaimer number 2. This is just my advice from myself to myself. I like to go down the rabbit hole. I like to go deeper into the layers of reality. Not everyone is like that. So always tune into your gut, tune into your intuition, and what you feel is the appropriate dose for you. I'm just sharing my experiences in the hopes that it's helpful for someone out there. Have a trip sitter for maximum safety and take a lower dose. If you ever feel unsure, just take a lower dose than usual. And like I said earlier, within the first hour, you can redose. So if you want to be cautious, take half of your dose in the first hour and then check in an hour later, see how you feel. If you're not feeling the effects super strongly, that's a good time to redose. So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to make this video because I keep hearing from other people that dosage isn't super important, or you can get to Mars with just 1 gram of shrooms. And maybe that's true for some people out there, but for me personally, I just don't find that to be accurate. Dosage is very important and gives you completely different experiences depending on what you need. So I hope this helps someone out there to understand what are the benefits of a more stronger trip and what are the benefits of a more gentle trip. And now you can decide for yourself, how potent do you want your trips to be? How much intensity are you willing to handle? How much dissolution of self are you willing to go through? As always, be intentional with every trip. Prepare, make sure everything is in order. Always respect the plant medicine. Make sure you download the mushroom trip checklist at mushroomchecklist.com. That'll give you a lot of detail on what to do before, during, and after your trip for maximum safety. Be sure to check out my podcast, The Microdose and the James Xander Trip. That'll give you plenty of guidance and inspiration on psychedelics. And for more shroomy and spiritual insights, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.